So today's session is focused around cloud security monitoring and analytics with Sumo Logic. I'm going to run through a couple of slides here just to kind of level set in terms of what the solution focuses, how we can actually help you to achieve your various use cases. But we'll really spend the majority of today's session in the demo environment and on the actual sort of on the continuous intelligence platform so that we can show you some of the core features that you can expect that kind of align to some of the use cases that we'll walk through today. So as I mentioned, just going to kind of breeze through a couple quick slides just to kind of set the foundation. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the chat or in the Q&A. And I can either answer them live depending or at the end of this session, depending on kind of the nature of the questions. So in yesterday's session, which some were able to potentially join, we were focused around audit compliance and kind of the left column for Sumo Logic security solutions. This really allows you to determine compliance and posture management and make sure that you're staying ahead of any audit season requirements. But for today's focus, it's really going to be around cloud security monitoring and analytics. So all on the same continuous intelligence platform, but with the focus being on monitoring, detecting, searching, investigating security incidents with kind of this analytics perspective for the deeper dives once you understand how to dive into a needle in the haystack versus more of a security monitoring approach for taking the broader view as you're kind of navigating through and looking to remediate potential security incidents. Cloud SIEM will be covered in a future session, as will Cloud SOAR. SIEM being more focused around triage of alerts, detection of threats, deeper investigation. Cloud SOAR really being about the orchestration and automation and kind of playbook building to allow you to really execute in a repeatable way and really build out those processes. So how does Sumo Logic, the continuous intelligence platform, truly improve security posture with security analytics? It really comes down to three core things that we hear consistently from our customers. Firstly, the fact that Sumo itself is cloud native. We are and were built on AWS from the start, which makes us able to really scale up quickly depending on kind of customer requirements. But it also means that we're able to bring in a really diverse array of firewall, database, identity access, CDN data, depending on the use case. We'll get into some more detail around the types of data sources. Additionally, we really hear a lot about the need for increased visibility, and that's kind of what the continuous intelligence platform is able to offer. For security teams that are monitoring, analyzing both cloud and on-prem data, you really have kind of the whole gamut of what's available to you, and you're able to cover kind of both sides of the coin in that regard. In terms of security-focused analytics, I think we hear a lot from our both people that are potentially going to use Sumo as well as actively using Sumo today, that there's really this focus around security-focused analytics and the ability to actually utilize out-of-the-box content on day one. And we'll be spending most of our time, really all of our time on the demo today, only looking really at what's available out of the box, which is something that you're not going to necessarily get on all platforms. If it's more of an open source focused platform, you're really having to build really from scratch, everything from scratch, inclusive of security analytics, dashboards, et cetera. And in the case of, in the case of basically, other scenarios, let's say, where it potentially is a company that has been more focused on DevOps or observability use cases, but doesn't have that deeper security focus. Again, you're going to have that missing piece of not having security focused analytics right out the gates. So that's a little bit of level setting, kind of the general flow for just really, this is more looking kind of like the platform level here. We're talking about collection, analyzing, alerting, visualizing. All four of those kind of come into play, and we'll show you throughout the demo what that looks like. We've talked a little bit already about the collection process and the fact that we're able to bring in many types of data sources. We'll get into a lot of detail around analysis, how to actually set up and save an alert, as well as kind of the visualization for taking the broader view on what's going on within your infrastructure. In terms of the architecture itself, so I think it's helpful before we actually show you the live demo to just think about how the data kind of flows into the platform, and then what kind of the granularity or level of analysis you can actually get into. So as I mentioned, the data sources that are available we kind of actually were more, in some ways, more focused around multi-cloud so far in the conversation. It could also be that you're building out, your own apps, most likely for your customers as an external product. And that can absolutely be tailed out as a log into Sumo, a very common use case. And that's where we can really address kind of application security requirements or product security requirements and really kind of tune accordingly. And then of course there'd be SaaS IT. So think of Zoom or Slack here. Multi-cloud meaning the actual cloud infrastructure itself that you're building on AWS, GCP, or Azure. And then on-prem as well. We still have many customers that utilize on-premise data and bring it in on a regular basis into Sumo Logic and have the ability to actually monitor and ingest first and then monitor that and be able to analyze at a deeper level. As we kind of think about the breakouts of monitoring versus analytics, a lot of that is really going to come down to surfacing critical security issues via dashboards and alerts. So we'll take a look at what the security monitoring dashboard looks like. Security analytics is actually getting deeper into how do I tune and generate a more specific query based on what the needle in the haystack is that I already know that I'm looking for. And then actually really for both monitoring and analyzing, but let's say more for analytics, I would say you're then going to have the ability to have a lot of granularity at both the, all of the device level, IP level, network, and database level. So all four of these and other filters that we'll look at even in the scope of the demo, but this should give you a better sense of what you can actually expect as far as what the architecture, what the kind of ingest and collection flow is as well. So, right, so in terms of the platform, so we're really, the flow here in terms of how we can help you to really improve security posture is really generating these actionable initial security insights, being able to prioritize threats, performing deeper investigations. We'll kind of touch a little bit on response, although primarily that's going to be more of a SOAR level conversation. And then analysis at the user level as well. So when we think about the prioritization of threats, obviously there are a ton of threats, or there's a large array of types of kind of aspects of the threat landscape that need to be considered. And sort of within the scope of a security overview or security monitoring dashboard, you're able to take kind of the broader view, which we'll look at. You can take, and then you can go into this deeper investigation, whether it's within a dashboard that's just more focused and has all the template variables or filters set up to kind of navigate to what you need. But it could also be that you're performing deeper investigations purely at the message level. Maybe you're generating a more specific query design around what your needs are, and then tuning the message, and then spitting out the results, and then looking out the messages and saying, hey, I actually want to get down to the individual raw event level. Response as well, you do have the option, and I won't spend as much time demoing this today, given that it's the focus of future sessions. But as we think about accelerating response, there is also the opportunity to use investigation response console ULM within the continuous intelligence platform that you can then use sort of a webhook within Slack that can allow you to quarantine hosts right from there, or just if you already know what the alert is telling you, you can actually act on that right out the gates and really perform that response on the fly and not have to kind of guess as to what the next best step is. You may already be confident enough to just jump right in. So with that, I'm actually going to jump into the live demo. In the meantime, I'm going to drop some of the sort of resources that are available to all. These are all public resources that are available to you. I'm going to drop these into the chat. I should also add, if you're looking to sign up for the free trial and get off to the races, you're welcome to do that right out the gates. Sorry, I should retype that. I had that. sumologic.com/sign-up. So that second link. And that'll give you the ability to quickly, size up and use all the various aspects of the platform right out the gates. And then that way you can kind of get live in the platform and really get to know it right away, kind of on your own pace as well. But certainly feel free to dig around on any of these. The Sumo Dojo Slack, is a set of a ton of our customers or even people just spinning up free trials, as well as Sumo employees that are answering questions live and kind of just oftentimes even thinking through a problem statement together and trying to understand that better. So cool. So let's jump into the demo itself. So I'm going to go ahead and, well, first off, let me just give you a quick lay of the land as far as the continuous intelligence platform goes, so that you have a better sense of kind of what the overarching structure is. So within managed data, if I can get my MacBook to load, let's see. It's not wanting to generate, not wanting to receive my click. Just one moment. Okay, that's better. Somehow the screen share was acting up a bit. Okay, cool. So if I go into, let's see. So yeah, if I go into managed data and collection, we can take a look at kind of what the list of collectors are. We see a lot of Kubernetes data, Palo Alto data. This being our demo account, we have more or less every data source under the sun, including some on-prem as well, as part of our demo environment. So you have the opportunity to then understand what data sources are available to you. Maybe you already have Sumo set up within your organization and you just want to get off to the races quickly. So you do have that opportunity to kind of look at the collection depending on your permissions levels. And then the app catalog will show you what's available kind of out of the box. So cloud security monitoring and analytics is really the focal point for today. So as we think about that, we have AWS Security Hub, WAF, CloudTrail, GuardDuty, VPC Flow. Those are the core Amazon sources that we're looking at, as well as Linux, Palo Alto, Windows. For kind of all 8 of these, they're all utilizing the kind of the new style of dashboards, which allows you to blend in metrics as well as set up a more kind of nuanced version of what we'd call filtering and just an improved UI overall. So we'll take a look at a couple of these examples. I think actually for today, it might be helpful to focus on Windows data initially. Maybe we'll stick with kind of OS level data. Potentially, if we have time, we can also spend some time on Linux data as well. As we think about this, so I'll start with some of the Windows examples. And as we kind of fire up some of these, let me actually close out. I had some of the demos open from yesterday still, so we can just get our eyes on the right area of focus. So as we think about, as I mentioned, kind of the breakout of security monitoring versus security analytics, here we're looking at an example where we're actually focusing in on what does it look like to look at the broader view of security monitoring for Windows. So in this case, we're looking at audit logs that have been tampered with, services stopped, ingestion delays, this kind of honeycomb visualization, which is also something that's available purely within kind of the new style of dashboard. You're able to actually look at, based on the darker color, the darker color is indicative of a higher instance or higher count. So we see EC2, AMAZ, ER3 is responsible for more of the services being stopped than, let's say, J7K is. And so in this case, we're actually kind of keying in on the services stopped and saying, we can identify which computer is responsible for, is more likely to be responsible for this breakout. But then we can also set a filter up here if we're interested. We can say, if we wanted to pull that up, we could decide what services stopped we want to focus on at the filter. We'll come back to the filters in a moment. But as we think about like the services stopped, we're seeing the breakout is really between primarily Win HTTP web proxy auto discovery service. We see network setup service as well. And because of that, this may be what you would expect, or it may not, but this could be indicative of something larger going on. Of say, we see sort of a spike around the 1300 mark versus the 8-hour mark, then that would indicate to us that we're seeing a bigger spike. But this may actually coordinate with when we expect services to be changing based on kind of what the DevOps team has built out as the flow and how it aligns with the various cron jobs that may be running in the background. Or it may be, indicative of something that's anomalous that we want to actually dig into. So I think probably more interesting, even from a cloud security monitoring perspective, would be thinking about what does it look like to actually look at the spikes in activity for audit logs tampered with. And here we're just keyed in on one device in particular. And we can see a spike in activity at kind of the 9 a.m. mark as well as the 11 a.m. mark. In both of these cases, again, this may be in line with what you expect. You may have, maybe you're running, pen testing jobs, or you were actually expecting certain behaviors to occur at that time. But these kinds of anomalies can really help us to navigate to and better understand what might be occurring. So I'm going to jump ahead as we think about kind of, here we're looking at, the security monitoring level. Well, let's kind of switch gears a bit more, slightly more granular security analytics level. We're actually keying in on individual users. We're not kind of looking at just the broader strokes anymore here. And we're seeing, in this case, we're seeing the breakout of the specific sort of ID numbers that are indicating to us which event IDs are firing off in line with which successful logins. We're seeing pretty consistent behavior here. But if we start to look at some of the ratios, and this is probably where it does get a bit potentially alarming, right? Because we're seeing 5,223 successful logins in the last 24 hours is the time window we have here, versus in the last 24 hours, we see 4,500 failed logins. So primarily we're seeing activity for the administrator, which definitely may be alarming, as well as vagrant. So you see a couple of users that are potentially of interest here. We want to better understand why. Two things that are jumping out. Why is the ratio so close between successful logins and failed logins? Like, honestly, that could just indicate like a user experience flaw, user flow flaw, that, or potentially even just something is broken with authentication. But more likely, we shouldn't expect almost a 1-to-1 ratio. And this may indicate to us that there's a high likelihood that we want to drill down on this and better understand, why are there so many failed logins? Could it, for example, be a brute force attack? Could it be a man-in-the-middle attack? It could be any number of different scenarios. But the other thing that stands out here is we see primarily 2 users that are responsible as the target here. So if we go and we just key in on only the administrator, this may indicate to us that something is slightly amiss here, and we should be able to set, or we could even just do null and then asterisk, and we should be able to pull up just the failed logins for these. So let me actually key in on, let's just try admin asterisk. That should give us what we want. So we can start with kind of null, and we can kind of work backwards from there. But as you can see here, we have essentially null administrator and null and panda one, as well as guest. So null guest. So we have this array of various types that are basically indicating to us what we would expect and what we can actually show. And so in light of that, we see that we're expecting a certain level of behavior, but then we see in reality, actually, all of the failed logins are responsible attached to null asterisk. So in light of that, I think it's something that's indicating basically we need to better understand that particular user behavior. We can continue to go down the line. For example, we could open up a search and we can actually start to key in on and set various filters just manually within the search as well, and indicate what are the event types we're most interested in. What are the source categories we want to key in on? Here we're looking at Windows JSON format as well as Windows event data. And all the security auditing data is being kind of flowed in because it's in such a structured format, we know how to quickly parse that out and navigate to what we need. Looks like we had a question from Scott Barta, by the way. So Scott had asked, are these page load times typical of the customer experience, or is your demo environment on the slower side? No, so all that's going on here is it seems like there's some interplay between just the Zoom screen share and the demo environment. It wasn't even registering a click a moment ago. So typically I use Chrome, I'm using Firefox for today. So something was a little bit amiss here in that regard, but there are also lots of ways, I should mention, to tune performance based on your requirements, right? So in this case, for example, we're looking at a little bit of a broader scope of data, 24 hours of data. You certainly have the option to carve that down to a shorter time slice, or even just, in this case, like we're searching across various source categories. So that's another way to tune the performance to improve it, is to just set it to a smaller set of data sources. In this case, like, so just to be specific, in this case, we're looking at Windows JSON format and CSE Windows event. I think in this case, it's probably more relevant to look at CSE Windows event, because then that way we're searching across the data that's also being used within a Cloud SIEM instance. So I think that would be an example of where it could be really helpful to kind of tune the performance based on what your requirements are. So hopefully that helps. Absolutely ping me offline. I can actually pop my email address. So Scott, if you have further questions around performance, I'm happy to talk through how we tackle that for particular use cases. So cool. So great question. Glad you asked it. Let's switch gears into a slightly different view or lens into Windows security analytics data. And we'll look at kind of a couple different angles here. So first, we'll look at default accounts usage. So we're looking at, again, we were kind of looking at accounts specific to login, but now we can just look at the actual usage of those accounts, how those are being, which services are associated with those, or which computers and devices specifically. So in this case, we see default account usage. So pretty similar visualization to what we looked at previously. We see that it's all being performed with an administrator for the most part, for subject username, and then target username, there's sort of a sub breakout within that. We see all the latest events that are flowing in. And then another example that I think is relevant, since we're kind of talking through, as we kind of think about specific types of data that can be best navigated to from a perspective of user group updates, for example, we can consider what are the updates that are occurring, what are the associated event types within them, and then how do we actually navigate across that, and what are the kind of audit successes that are attached to those. So a little bit more of a Windows focus for today. Just to kind of give you a quick lay of the land, I could potentially show you a couple of, let me close out some of this Windows data. We can look at a couple of examples of Palo Alto Networks data as well, just so that we're getting like the full scope and scale of what's available to you within the platform. And want to just give like a little bit alternate lens, since we've been more OS focused. So within this, we actually see within the Palo Alto Networks data, we see outbound traffic and potential exfiltration activity. And we see top 20 hosts. Again, the darker color indicates we have more outbound traffic over 10.10.22.13. And all of the outbound traffic by app. As we'd expect, we see a lot coming in through SMTP, web browsing, MySQL. But some of these may be more concern, right? Incomplete may be that we are missing some data. We want to better understand that. We may not expect to see LinkedIn or iTunes data, in which case it may be indicating kind of, something that's misaligned with corporate policies and needs to be investigated in that regard. We also see top 20 hosts broken out by outbound DNS traffic, as well as day over day outbound DNS traffic. So we just see there are lots of different visualizations that can, I think, help to really break that out. And again, this is where we're looking at kind of security analytics versus monitoring in that breakout. Here we can see the outlier or the threats. If I actually expand this out to, let's say, the last 7 days, we should be able to see some outliers. In this case, we see no outliers within that expected time range. But as a result, if we expand the scope of the overall timeline that we're looking at, we should be able to find some various outliers that would indicate to us that it's not the behavior that we expected. And one thing that I didn't get to spend as much time on was basically this sort of command and control center, which is what we refer to. In this case, we're looking at a visualization of particular CNC events that are, and the kind of trend lines within those. And then we can actually key in on various areas. So here we see, okay, there's some business being done clearly within kind of Southeast China, not far from Shenzhen. If that's something we expect to see, then that's fair game. If your organization happens to not do business in a certain region, it would just be something to potentially look into. We have had customers that had noticed that behavior and then come to find that, their engineers were traveling and it was a totally valid use case for that particular scenario. But also you can envision where it can be helpful to look at kind of the classic Superman example of where you're seeing a login from two vastly different locations across the globe within, say, 10 minutes that are kind of impossible logins. So we're able to actually visualize that all within that. So great. So, and as we look at kind of the outlier visualization, we can consider these pink triangles, and in this case, we see only along the top edge, which is what we're most interested in, which is great. We're seeing just the threats and the moments in time in which it's actually popping out above the expected range. So 225, 6 o'clock, et cetera. So within those timelines, we can investigate each of these threat outliers, and then also even break it out by high severity versus low severity, and then make some decisions based around that. But yeah, so I mean, this one obviously being very expansive, we're actually looking at sort of questionable activity, high risk activity. It's broken out. You can see there's lower activity for high risk, as you'd expect, because the events kind of drop off as the severity increases. So just a lot of different angles or ways in which you could slice and dice potentially Palo Alto Networks data and really be able to navigate to what you're looking to achieve and really align with your various use cases. So cool. So I know I covered a lot. Typically, I just stick with OS or with firewall data, but I was kind of jumping between the two for each. Feel free to reach out directly to sales. I know I dropped my note in there as well. sales@sumologic.com. We'll be able to connect you up with kind of the right sales contact for your region and make sure that you have what you need in order to achieve your goals. And then I would also just it's in the chat already, but I would also just mention, absolutely feel free to sign up for sumologic.com/sign-up, and that way you get sort of a 2 weeks, and we can adjust the timing as needed, but you get a 2 weeks free trial in order to just get live and up and running within the platform. Start bringing in some data. You could even start bringing in sort of log gen or kind of dummy data that aligns with your use case, and that way you can get a better sense of how the platform functions aligned with your specific use cases. I know we're focused on Windows and Palo Alto Networks data today, but you may have some completely different data you're looking to bring in. You want to kind of get a better sense of what the goals are, how you can achieve your goals around that. So awesome. So with that, I'm gonna just hop on mute for the last minute or so in case there are any final questions, but thank you so much for joining today's session. Feel free to pop anything you have in a chat or Q&A, or reach out directly to the email addresses that I popped into the chat. And yeah, again, thank you so much for joining today's session. We look forward to seeing you in future sessions as well.